You find an old photo or an old message thread, maybe an old video of yourself or a journal you kept or a post you made online years ago, and something happens in your chest, not quite pain, not quite embarrassment, something in between, a full body recoil from a version of yourself that no longer exists. You might laugh it off. Cringe humor is everywhere. But underneath the laugh, something real is happening because it's not just the haircut or the fashion. It's the way you talked, the things you thought were deep, the opinions you held with complete confidence. The person you were performing for people who probably don't even remember it. The reaction feels instinctive, automatic, but it's not random. There's a specific psychological mechanism behind why we look back at our old selves and want to quietly disappear. And understanding it says more about how identity works than it does about how embarrassing you used to be. The cringe has a source. It lives in the distance between who you are now and who you were then, not just in terms of taste or style, but in terms of awareness, judgment, emotional maturity, the way you understood yourself in the world. When that distance is large, the reaction is strong. You don't cringe at your behavior from last week the way you cringe at behavior from 10 years ago. The further back you go, the more foreign that person can feel, and the more foreign they feel, the more the exposure of their limitations stings. Here's the key thing though, the cringe isn't really about the past. It's being generated in the present. It's your current self, with your current standards, your current awareness, your current understanding of how to navigate the world. Looking back at a version of you who didn't have any of that yet, and judging accordingly. Which means the stronger the cringe, in a certain sense, the more you've grown. You can only see the gap if you've crossed it. There's something worth sitting with there. The person you're cringing at was operating on incomplete data. They didn't know what you know now, they hadn't been through what you've since been through. Their emotional tools were whatever they had access to at that point in their life, which was less. It was always going to be less. When you cringe at your 20-year-old self posting something painfully earnest online, or your teenage self saying something you now recognize as ignorant, or a younger version of you chasing approval in ways that now feel obvious and a little sad, you're applying your current lens to someone who didn't have it. That's not a neutral act. It's a form of comparison that's structurally unfair. You're holding a past version of yourself to a standard they had no access to, and the cringe is the feeling of that mismatch. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing everything. Some things you did in the past may genuinely warrant reflection. But the raw, visceral cringe, the wince at the photo, the physical recoil from the old message, that's not a moral judgment. That's the sensation of growth recognizing itself. Here's where it gets more complicated. Most people carry a quiet assumption that they are, at their core, a consistent person. The same self moving through time, growing, maybe, changing on the surface, but fundamentally the same. This assumption is useful. It gives life a sense of coherence. But it's also not entirely accurate. The person you were at 15, 25, 35, they held different values, had different fears, wanted different things, processed the world differently. In meaningful ways, they were different people wearing the same name. When you encounter evidence of that, an old video, an old post, a memory that surfaces, the continuity assumption gets rattled. You're confronted with a self that feels genuinely other, someone you don't fully recognize. And that's unsettling in a specific way because the self doesn't like feeling discontinuous. It doesn't like the implication that the person who exists right now might also, one day, be someone future you barely recognizes. The cringe at old you is partly that, a confrontation with impermanence, with the fact that identity is not a fixed thing you have. It's a moving thing you're always in the process of becoming. A lot of the most intense cringe moments involve how you performed for other people. The persona you put on, the things you said to seem a certain way, the image you were carefully, sometimes desperately trying to project. Because most people at various points in their life, especially adolescence and early adulthood, are performing, not dishonestly necessarily. But they haven't fully figured out who they are yet, so they try on versions. They perform confidence they don't feel. They perform depths they haven't earned. They perform coolness or relatability or edginess or wisdom as a way of testing what sticks. Looking back at that performance from a place of more genuine self-knowledge is uncomfortable in a very specific way, because now you can see the effort. You can see the insecurity underneath the performance. You can see what you were actually trying to get: validation, belonging, admiration, and how visible that want was even when you thought you were hiding it. The cringe at old you is sometimes the cringe of watching someone try too hard. And the reason it stings is that the someone is you. The exposure feels retroactive. Even though the audience has mostly moved on, something in you hasn't. Not everyone experiences this equally, and the difference tends to come down to a few things. People who have changed significantly, in beliefs, in self-awareness, in emotional maturity, tend to cringe more intensely at older versions of themselves. The gap is larger. The contrast is sharper. People who have a stronger investment in their current self-image also tend to feel it more. If who you are now matters a great deal to you, if your identity feels like something carefully constructed, then evidence of a messier, less polished version threatens that construction more directly. And people who grew up in environments where image was heavily monitored, where how you appeared to others carried high stakes, often carry more residual sensitivity around being seen in a compromised way, even retrospectively. None of this is a character flaw. It's just the shape that self-awareness takes in different people under different conditions. There's one more layer worth naming. Sometimes the cringe isn't just about embarrassment at who you were. It's about discomfort with the fact that you were ever that unaware. A kind of retrospective frustration. Couldn't I see it? Why didn't I know better? How was I so oblivious to what was happening? This reaction is understandable, but it misunderstands something important. Awareness doesn't arrive in advance. It arrives through experience, through making mistakes, through accumulating enough life that patterns become visible. The version of you who didn't know better wasn't failing to apply knowledge they had. They genuinely didn't have it yet. The cringe, in this sense, is the mind protecting its current sense of competence by distancing itself from past incompetence. It's saying, that was then, this is now, I'm not that person anymore, and there's something healthy in that boundary. The problem only comes when the distancing tips into shame, when instead of recognizing growth, the cringe becomes evidence you use against yourself. A reason to feel that you were fundamentally flawed rather than simply earlier. Here's what the cringe at your old self actually tells you. It tells you that you're not the same person you were, that something has shifted. In how you see yourself, how you read other people, how you move through the world, the discomfort is the proof of that movement. It's easy to treat the cringe as embarrassment, but embarrassment is about being seen badly by others. What happens when you look back at old you is more internal than that. It's the current self confronting evidence of its own evolution, and finding the earlier drafts harder to look at than the finished version. Every version of you was doing what they could with what they had. That's not a comforting click. It's just accurate. You did not have the awareness then that you carry now. You couldn't have. It had to be built, and building it required being the person who didn't have it yet. The old photo, the old post, the old message. They're not evidence of who you are. They're evidence of who you were on the way to becoming who you are. That's not something to recoil from. That's something that's genuinely worth understanding.